She calls the sheriff's department and files the missing person report. And she tells them that a lady named Donna Mason picked Susan up and was taking her somewhere. So the officers go and find Donna, talk to her, and she says, oh yeah, I saw her that night. We were going to party, but she decided she wanted to go somewhere else. So she dropped her off at a house on Hoover Street. As soon as Donna said that she had dropped Susan off at this Hoover Street house, Tammy knew she wasn't telling the truth because there was no electricity at the house. Susan had an intense fear of the dark. There's no way Susan would have willingly gone there in the middle of the night.
Welcome to episode 388 of FBI Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Jerry Spurgers, who served in the FBI for 24 years. In this episode, he reviews his investigation of the disappearance of a federal witness, Susan Cooper, from Malvern, Arkansas. The case involved drug conspiracy, witness intimidation, and murder. Jerry investigated this case with a team of local officers, sheriff detectives, and an FBI intelligence analyst by using traditional police skills and new technologies. He was a member of the Little Rock Division's evidence response team and is an experienced death investigator. He also reviews the steps taken to collect evidence at the crime scene of a murder or accidental death. Jerry is the author of Murder at Midnight, the FBI's battle with violence and drugs in a small southern town, a true crime book that recounts the investigation and murder of federal witness Susan Cooper, the case that we are reviewing in this episode. Jerry plans to write about other cases he worked and will release his second book in the spring of 2026. Jerry served his entire FBI career in the Little Rock field office, where he worked on a violent crime squad. His duties range from working automobile chop shops and interstate theft cases to extortion, kidnappings, bank robberies, and homicides in which the federal government had jurisdiction. He was promoted to supervisory special agent and managed his squad for several years before stepping down. For most of his career, he was a member of the evidence response team, a collateral duty he assumed in addition to his violent crime work. Jerry's favorite aspect of ERT was assisting other agencies in homicide cases, which afforded him the rare opportunity as an FBI agent to participate in over 25 death investigations. While most of these were local matters, some were prosecuted in the federal system. 5 of these investigations involved serial killers. After retiring from the FBI, Jerry was hired by the Arkansas House of Representatives as the Chief Security Officer and Sergeant of Arms. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link to where you can join my reader team to keep up with the FBI in books, TV, and movies, and a link to where you can buy me a cup of coffee. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Jerry Spurgers. Hey, Jerry, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Jerry. How are you?
I'm doing great. You are connecting with me from Little Rock, Arkansas, where you spent most of your FBI career.
I actually spent my entire FBI career here.
Well, we'll talk about that later when we get into when and why you joined the FBI, because That's a little different. Most of us have had at least 1 or 2 transfers. But being in Arkansas, you made a lot of contacts in the community. Something else we'll talk about at the end is the fact that you were a member of the evidence response team, and in that capacity, you helped the local police with the forensics of homicide investigations.
Absolutely.
Well, that's going to be fascinating. I'm going to hold it to the end because I know a lot of people write about the FBI and they're always sticking the FBI in a murder. And for the most part, that's not what we do. So we're going to talk about a case today, and it is about a murder that you wrote about in your book, Murder at Midnight. which is all about the case that we're going to talk about today. So another thing that we'll do at the end is to talk about your writing career. Let's get started on the case. Where do you want to start?
In October 2016, I was a street agent assigned to the Violent Crime Squad in Little Rock and received a telephone call from the chief deputy of the Hot Spring County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff's Office is located in Malvern, which is about a little over an hour south of Little Rock. He called and said they work on a missing adult case. We'd like you guys to come down and take over the case. And as you know, that's really not something within the FBI's purview to do. And so I talked to him about things that we could do to help. We would offer up ERT if they had a crime scene. We had analysts that could help with phone records, some of the technical type of programs. But there really wasn't a federal nexus at that time. We had a couple more calls over the next couple of days, and he understood. I don't know that he liked it, but he understood why we couldn't come down. But after about the third day, I got a call into my supervisor's office, and the criminal chief for the United States Attorney's Office, AUSA I'd known most of my career, was in there and invited me in and gave me more information on the case. He told me that the victim was a 34-year-old lady by the name of Susan Cooper, and she had a drug history, but she was also currently working as a confidential informant and made drug buys from a number of individuals. And specifically, one of them was a federal subject, was going to be indicted in a federal case, which made Susan then a federal witness, which gave us the jurisdiction to go in and start. So probably about the 5th or so of October, I went down and met with the chief deputy, took a couple other agents with me. As it turned out, there were about 20 people in the room. They were with the sheriff's office, they were with the local prosecutor's office, local police departments, neighboring sheriff's office and police departments, and they told me what they had learned so far.
So when the chief is calling you and asking that the FBI take over the case, why was it that he felt his department wasn't able to handle the case?
They basically had reached an impasse. They had worked on this case for just under 2 weeks. And as we'll talk, they had done a tremendous amount of work and had just reached a standstill. They were looking for some way to go further. No insult on them, but it's also a small county, a rural county, so not a big department, not a lot of manpower. I think he thought that we could probably bring more manpower to it. And as it turned out, he and I had actually known each other for several years, and he was familiar with some of the things, some of the aspects the FBI could bring to an investigation.
So I take it at this meeting, you had a chief that was really relieved and excited that the FBI was going to be able to join the investigation and move it forward from there.
Absolutely, he was. And again, nothing bad. Arkansas is, again, with it being the only office I was assigned in, I don't really know how it completely compares to large offices, but it's a small state with a small law enforcement community. And when there's something kind of big, it's really common that neighboring departments join in and help out. And so I think just the idea of having someone else to maybe offer guidance or offer assistance going to be a source of comfort to him.
So what's the first thing that you decided to do? Why don't you bring us up to speed on exactly what occurred?
I think it was October the 4th, October the 5th. We go down for this meeting. It's myself and 2 other agents who were CAST trained, the cellular analysis guys. Like any case, the telephones are going to be a part of it, and I wanted their expertise with us. So we go to the meeting, tell us a story. They tell us, of course, that that it was kind of common knowledge within the drug culture in that area that Susan Cooper was in their terminology, she was a snitch. As our terminology, she was a cooperating witness, a confidential informant that was making drug buys. The story they told us was that on October the 1st, they received a telephone call from a lady named Tammy Edwards. Tammy and Susan Cooper, our victim, were good friends. They had been together on the night of September the 26th. They had gone to dinner. They had watched presidential debates. And at some point, Susan leaves with someone else. 2 or 3 days later, Tammy realizes she hasn't heard from her friend Susan. She tries to call her. She doesn't get an answer. She calls her family. No one's seen her. And so then she calls the sheriff's department and files the missing person report. The deputies go to scene, talk to Tammy, and she tells them that on September the 26th, she initially told us 10 o'clock. She was a little off on her time. But about 10 p.m., a lady named Donna Mason, who she didn't know, but she knew was friends with Susan, picked Susan up and was taking her somewhere. She was going to spend the night with Donna. At 11:41, she gets a pocket dial telephone call, and it's Susan and most of the calls unintelligible, but it's Susan and Donna talking. Tammy had already gone to sleep by the time the telephone call came in, so she didn't realize it until the next morning. So the officers go and find Donna, talk to her, and she says, "Oh yeah, I saw her that night. We were going to party or something, but she decided she wanted to go somewhere else. So she dropped her off at a house on Hoover Street." kind of talk about this in the book, is the Hoover Street house. This is a place that Tammy Edwards owned. Susan had lived there in the past, and we spent a lot of time in the book talking about this, Susan had an intense fear of the dark. Lots of reasons behind that, but as soon as Donna said that she had dropped Susan off at this Hoover Street house, Tammy knew she wasn't telling the truth, because there was no electricity at the house. There's no way Susan would have willingly gone there in the middle of the night. She's not able to get anything from Donna. Donna stays consistent with the police officer or the deputy that's talking to her. Yep, that's where I took her. Pretty soon, the detectives down there learned that on that night of September the 26th, before Donna picked up Susan, she had gone to this apartment complex called the Babcock Terrace Apartments. She's at the Babcock Apartments. She's there to sell drugs to a lady. And while she's there, this person that's going to buy the drugs, plus another person, are there. And for the hour or so that Donna's there, she's consistently on her telephone. She's sending text messages. She's making calls. And she's making these comments. I don't even like her. You don't know how much people want to pay me to set her up. I don't know why she's calling me. So the two people that are buying drugs from her know there's something going on, but don't know what. Well, once word begins to get around that Susan's missing, the girl that was going to buy the drugs talks to the law enforcement officers and says, yeah, let me tell you what happened. I was going to buy some pills from Donna that night. She says just exactly what the rumors were, that Donna's on the phone. She's making these calls. I don't know where she went, but she ends up leaving. Talks to the other girls. They all support the same story. So the detectives go and pick Donna back up again and ask her, what's going on? She sticks by her story. Oh, I don't know. I just took Susan to Hoover Street. As it turns out, Donna was a parole violator. She was supposed to be living in another county. She wasn't supposed to be in Malvern. So the officers detained her. After she was there for, I think, a day, she sends word that she wants to tell the officers more information. They go bring her in. She goes, well, here's what happened. Susan had bought drugs from a guy named Sam Sherman. Sam Sherman's cousin and close friend was a guy named Donald Smith. Donald Smith, according to Donna, Donald Smith had contacted Donna and said, I want you to set up Susan. I want you to meet her. We got to make sure she can't testify against Sam Sherman. Donna, in this drug culture, she's pretty familiar with what's going on. According to Donna, she assumes that they're going to beat Susan up and intimidate her. And so she and Smith make plans for Donna to take Susan to this house on Grigsby Ford Road. This is a remote house on the outskirts of Malvern. It's pitch black. There's no street lights, very few houses. And it's under the pretext of Susan's either going to buy or sell drugs with some unknown client. Donna won't tell her because she knows that if Susan knew that it was Donald Smith that she was going to meet with, she wouldn't have gone. They go to the house, they get out, they walk to the front porch of the house. It's empty. It's pitch black, no electricity. They stand on the front porch, smoke, and after a while, Susan's paranoia of the dark kicks in, and she says, we got to leave. She starts walking back towards Donna's vehicle. Donna gets in the driver's side. Susan steps in the passenger side. Donna says, that's when she hears a gunshot. She looks over. Susan has been shot. She falls in the truck. Donald Smith reaches in, grabs her, pulls her out of the truck, and Donna panics and drives off. She says, as she's leaving, she hears 5 or 6 more gunshots. So based on that information, the officers go to find this Grigsby Ford house and learn that it's owned by a guy named Willie McMillan. Willie doesn't live on the property. He lives at the next nearest property, which is about a quarter mile away, half a mile away. They go talk to him. He gives them consent to search the house and the property. It has no information. Doesn't know what happened. Hadn't heard anything. He was at his house in bed that night, but says he didn't hear anything. Officers search the place. They don't find blood. They don't find any shell casings. Again, this is about 2 weeks now after Susan's disappeared. And so they've kind of reached this impasse. They go back to Donna. Sherman is in jail, has an attorney, so they can't talk to him. They get a search warrant, search Donald Smith's house, find some guns and some telephones that turn out not to have any relevance to the case. Donald Smith lawyers up. He doesn't say anything. So right now, all they have is a missing girl, no evidence of her body, and Donna's statements. Donna's got a questionable history, drug use, rumored to have some prostitution, parole violator, and she's changed her stories several times. So that's when they bring us in and said, hey, this is what we've got. We've gone as far as we go. Can the FBI do anything else?
At that point, when they bring you up to speed, do you think you can do anything else? Are you wondering if all the investigative techniques have been used, or do you think that you have something in your evidence response team tool bag that will start this case going again?
At instant. In fact, I remember telling the guys as I left, hey, I think y'all solved the case. We just got to figure out how to prove it. I did not have anything specific, but I was confident that we would find something to further the case. I knew they had not really done any in-depth analysis, cell phone records, and we had a analyst assigned to our squad who was tremendous at digging into telephones and social media and identifying people, finding connections. And so I was pretty confident, she would be able to, give us some help. Susan had a computer at that time that had not been analyzed. So I felt confident there were things we could do. But this time in my career, I think I had 19 years in, and I'd worked on some cases, some cold cases. And I know that anytime you go back and read through files, you find leads that need to be covered. So I felt pretty confident. I didn't know what the smoking gun would be, but I felt confident we would be able to give them some assistance.
So is that what you did next, is to get a subpoena for those phone records?
As it turned out, they had already done that. The local officers had seized Smith's phone records. They had seized Susan's phone records. They had seized Donna Mason's. They just didn't have the tools to really analyze it other than just, quickly going through. And so, yes, we took those, dumped all that stuff on the analyst's desk, and she starts, looking for connections and building timelines around the time that Susan disappears. The other thing that I did was read through all their reports and watch the interviews. And I found some, as anybody does when you're looking at something after the fact, I found some questions that need to be asked. I found some people that had not been interviewed. And so at the same time at the same time as the analyst was plugging through his telephone records, myself and the DEA agent that was assigned to the case were going out and interviewing people. Again, Arkansas being a small community, by this time, all the other participants had gone back to their own jurisdictions or other cases. And it really, for the next few months, was primarily just the DEA agent now that were working the case. If we had something specific that we needed from the sheriff's office or the police department, they were always willing to do whatever we wanted. They just really weren't aggressively working the case themselves at that time. As we're studying, we're also learning about Malvern. Now, I'm a native Arkansan, and I've been here for years. I never really worked in Malvern. So I, did a little background on the town and kind of found out about it. But one of the things that really kind of piqued my interest and really drew me to this case is there was this perception within the drug culture that murderers weren't prosecuted, that people just got away with stuff. And, it was an unfair characterization, but the wall of silence that the officers were meeting was just like nothing I had seen. To start to get people talking to me, I find out that there were several murders that had not been prosecuted, which made it, again, difficult to find witnesses. There was a case in 2002 where a man and wife were executed the woman was executed in the home. The man was executed running away, executed in the middle of the street. The case was worked. Some suspects developed, but never nothing charged. There was another case about 10 years later where a lady is coming home. She has her child in the backseat of the car. As she gets out of the vehicle, she's ambushed, and all these shots are fired at her. In fact, the officers end up getting shell out of the headrest behind the seat she was sitting on. Somehow or another, neither her or the child were struck. Officers went out, did a search, brought in a tracking dog, went to the woods, found a bandana that the DNA on it came back to Donald Smith, the same Donald Smith that we hear about later. And this is back in 2012. But again, there just wasn't enough there to charge Donald. So again, the word got around. People kind of knew what was going on, but no one gets charged. Another guy that had died in June before Susan disappeared. Not accurate, but these rumors are going around that he was given an intentional overdose for some reason. And then about 2 weeks before Susan disappeared, a guy disappears. And this guy's in the drug culture. He actually had some connections with Susan. And when I first got on the case, they found him. They ended up finding him later on, and he's a murder victim, and it turns out to be unrelated to Susan. But at the time, we don't know. And so that's part of what kind of made me so passionate about this case is that you have these people, however big this group is, that have just literally gotten away with murder in this town for years. And kind of really just made me very passionate about working the case. I was the senior agent on the squad. I had a supervisor that was a former state trooper. He was basically gave me carte blanche, just really primarily focused on this case. I was driving in Malvern, which is about an hour or so from Little Rock. I was driving down almost every day. We were interviewing, and we tried some things. In December, we did a mass interviews. I brought in interview teams of FBI guys, DEA guys, local guys, and we interviewed, 20 or 30 different people. Again, trying to find more bits and pieces. And we were finding information that kind of substantiated Donna's story, but we couldn't find a witness that saw it happen, and we couldn't find anybody that would tell us where Susan's body was. Some of the information that we picked up, we learned that after Susan was allegedly shot, Donna actually goes back to Smith's house where he details her truck. The locals find out about this. They seize the truck, get a search warrant, seize it, find blood from Susan in the truck. So again, just a very trace amount, but enough that, that Donna's story is making sense, but still just not enough to charge. And the big thing is we don't have the witnesses that we need.
I take it that was the issue for all of those murders. It's that People knew about it. People were aware. They had, the evidence. But it sounds like because they knew they might be next, they weren't talking.
Yeah, it's absolutely a wall of silence, and really kind of understandably so. And as we talk more, I'll even kind of hit that point home a little bit harder. But that's exactly, we couldn't make witnesses. So we were really trying to rely as much as we could on things that we could do. We obtained Facebook search warrants for everybody basically that we thought was involved. And that was quite the process. I was a violent crime guy, and so we didn't really do a lot of in-depth cyber investigations at that time. So, learning that whole process and learning how to read the records, using the telephone records, getting the cast guys to learn. And we were picking up on some really, kind of interesting things. We learned that on September the 23rd, the Friday before Susan disappears, Sam Sherman's attorney is in contact with the Assistant United States Attorney assigned to the case. What had happened after he had been in prison, federal prison, was out on supervised release, and sold drugs to Susan 5 or 6 times. Picked him back up with the idea of trying to work him to get to bigger targets. He kind of, throws out some names they already know, doesn't do anything to help. And so Assistant United States Attorney says, we're going to go ahead and indict this guy. Sherman knows that's pending. His attorney is talking to him, trying to figure out a way to plead to it. At the same time, he has a state trial coming up that he thinks is going to be the week of September the 26th. But on the morning of September 23rd, at Friday morning, his attorney gets the call that the government is not going to offer him a plea, not going to offer him credit for his work done. He's going back to prison, and he panics. He starts calling people, of course, calls Smith. There were 2 or 3 witnesses, and I'm not going to mention their names. They're in the book as aliases, but there are a couple different people whose names were brought up as suspects in that murder where the man and wife were executed. The community is all aware that they're suspects, but nothing's ever happened to them. Well, it's 2 of the first guys that Sherman calls when he gets the call that he's going back to prison. So over the weekend, there's a number of calls between Smith and Donna Mason, which is where they're talking about setting up this meeting. There are calls between Smith and Sherman. Smith is in Malvern. Sherman at this time is not in jail. He's living up in a town in the northeast part of the state, about 70 miles from Malvern. You go into Monday, and of course, we don't have the actual text, or we don't have the substance of the conversations. There was no wiretap or anything. But looking at the timing of the calls, it looks like Smith and Donna are making the plans for that night. They had this meeting with Susan Cooper and Smith. That evening, telephone records show us that Smith gets in his car, drives 70-something miles to Batesville, which is where Sherman lives, is there for 45 minutes, turns around and drives right back. To us, that means they had something to talk about that they weren't comfortable talking about on the phone. We thought the circumstances indicated that they had made the decision they were going to go ahead and kill Susan.
And when was this?
Monday night, September the 26th, the day that Susan disappears.
Oh, the same day.
Actually, about 3 hours. Smith gets back to Malvern about 2 to 3 hours before Susan's killed. So we've got this tremendous number of circumstances that are coming together. We still can't quite get to the point where the prosecutors are willing to make the charges. And we understand that. I mean, as you're well aware, you get one chance, so you don't violate double jeopardy. So we're just kind of looking at everything we're doing. We're trying to find someone that can take us to Susan. So as we're looking through his phone records, we find a lady by the name of Molly Anderson that Smith is in frequent contact with up to the minutes before we believe Susan was killed. We start trying to find her to find out what she knows. Extremely elusive. We can't find her. Just no luck at all. Again, just trying to point everything we can to get there. And we're getting kind of nervous that Smith is going to hurt somebody else. By this time, Sherman's in jail, so he's not really a threat. Donna Mason, who was probably never really a physical threat to anybody, she's in jail. Only person that's on the street is Smith, and he's the one that we believe is the shooter, and we think he has this past. And I spend time in the book talking about his past. There were actually 2 or 3 other instances of violence that we knew about involving him. So again, we really kind of get concerned about it.
You might have said it and I just missed it, but why is Donna in jail?
Donna was charged with murder because she took Susan to where she was killed. And this is at the state level. This was not by the feds. She was charged and was eventually dropped down to hindering apprehension or something along those lines because she made the false statements. Initially, she told deputies that she had no idea what happened to Susan, and they went off on all these tangents. And then she finally came back around and said, "Oh yeah, well," begrudgingly, told them, "Oh, this is what's happened." So she was not a willing witness by any stretch of the imagination.
This might be a teachable moment for people who are not in law enforcement. Talk a little bit more about why, even though she says that she thought they were going to just beat Susan up, why she would have been charged with murder.
The thought process there is that Susan was murdered. I mean, the locals are there. It's kind of what everything goes. Well, one of the charges, they don't use it in the state a lot. We use it in the government a lot, is this idea of a conspiracy. And when someone works together as part of the crime, they can be charged. And so I don't think the state term was conspiracy to commit murder, but that's basically from the federal term. That's what we would do. She was part of this. We believed that there was a group of 3 people, Sherman, Smith, and Mason, that decided to take some type of action against Susan to keep Susan from testifying against Sherman. Donna, by her own words, admitted to taking Susan to this, luring her to this place under false pretenses where she was killed. We had her talking to her friends beforehand saying, people want me to set her up. She was not an innocent player by any stretch of the imagination.
Can we take some time now to talk a little bit more about Susan? I think I read in a newspaper article that she was 44 when she died.
She was born in 72, so I think it was 34. She's in her 30s or 40s, something along those lines. Susan had a tough life. She was one of 5 or 6 children. Parents divorced early. And this is information that is coming from her siblings, that her mother really kind of picked on her. And I don't know that everybody agrees, but it's part of what we got. Susan, I think, was probably rebellious at times to the point that she married at 16, really just so she could get out of the house. Marriage was quickly annulled, but by that time she was on her own. But Susan wanted to do right. Her family described her as she wanted the American dream. And first marriage, like I said, was annulled. A few years later, she meets a guy, good, hardworking guy. They marry. Both of them had kids beforehand. Well, I'm not sure about her. He had kids beforehand. They had children together. She's in church. I think she's maybe even teaching kids. She's working, had probably done drugs in the past, but wasn't done at the time. And her husband gets terminally ill. Don't remember what type of cancer it is. 1 or 2 of their sons have some pretty serious illnesses, and Susan starts taking drugs. And so she ends up in this drug culture. Periodically, she would get out of it and she would try to do right. But as you and I both know, for some people, that drug, once they started, they just can't get away. And so Susan would find herself pulled back in.
And her drug of choice was methamphetamines?
Correct. Started off, like a lot of them, started off with marijuana and moved into meth, and she stuck with meth. At the time she disappeared, she was making these drug buys. A lot of times people that make drug buys are people that are in trouble for something already, kind of working off those trouble. They're out making buys. Well, that wasn't Susan's case. She didn't have any charges against her, but there were 2 things going. She was dating a guy that she was hoping that, her work would kind of be transferred over to him as far as, good credit, and she was getting paid. So that's why she made all these drug buys. We actually learned that she made buys from about 30 different people, that Sam Sherman was the only one, I believe, that was facing any kind of federal charges. She was a parent. She had grandkids, reading her own words. She loved her grandkids. And again, she would have spells where she would do well. And the people that I've talked to that knew her liked her as a person. But stress would get to her and she would fall back into the drugs.
And was she cooperating with both you said federal charges? Was the case that was with Sam Sherman an FBI case? You said federal.
It was DEA. It was a DEA case. He had gone to jail with the DEA. He was out on supervised release, and the DEA was working with the AUSA when Susan made the controlled buys. And so actually early on in the murder part of the investigation, the DEA was down there before we were. They helped in a lot of the initial interviews. But as time kind of passed, they were pulled back to other cases. The FBI and the Hot Spring County Sheriff's Office became the lead investigators for the rest of the case. So we're in the summer of 2018. We've looked, we've done things, we've tried just everything we could think of. We've gone out we'll get a rumor that her body was dumped in some remote location. We would go to these spots, and we're places snake infested. They have alligators in this area, although we never saw any, but in some pretty rough areas looking for her, and just striking out every time. So by the summer of 2018, we had reached a point where we were kind of at a loss. And we were genuinely concerned that Smith might harm someone with him still being on the street. The investigator that was assigned at the time was a guy named Glenn Pye, retired federal employee. After he retired, I went to work for the sheriff's office. He and I worked this case for the last couple of years. Talked to the sheriff, and the sheriff finally made the decision, go ahead and arrest him. That was a little bit different, in the federal system, something along those lines. I don't know of any situation when an agent just goes out and makes arrests without coordinating with the United States Attorney's Office first. The state system is a little bit different. And I don't think they were completely happy that we made the arrest at the time we did, but it turned out to be the absolutely perfect thing to do. 2 things happened, actually 3 things happened after we made that arrest. First of all, Molly Anderson, that we had been looking for months and months, once she learned that Smith was in jail, she came forward. We interviewed her, FBI interviewed her, and she admitted to, she had been involved with Smith, tumultuous relationship, on again, off again. I was off at the time, but she said that in November of 2016, 2 months after Susan disappeared, Smith has gotten hurt. His hand's bandaged up. He's hurt, and they have him on some kind of painkiller, some kind of drugs. Well, during this time, she asked him about his hand, what happened, and he comes up with a story that we kind of outline in the book. But basically, because he's under drugs, under the influence of the medication, he tells her, he admits to killing Susan and said he killed Susan to keep her from testifying against Sherman. So now we've got two witnesses that are telling us a couple of stories. So now the case is getting stronger. At the same time that happens, one of those, I think, really neat things, we decide to bring Willie McMillan to the grand jury. Willie McMillan was interviewed early on, claimed not to know anything. We felt like he had to know something. I talked to BAU. They give us some interview strategy. Another agent and I go out and talk to him at his house one day, and he doesn't really tell us a lot other than the fact he says, I'm at my home that night that Susan disappears. I get woke up. I go outside. Donna Smith is in his car. There's a white female slumped over in the front seat. He assumes it's Susan. Smith says, come on with me. He refuses, and that's the last he knows of it. So he's giving us a little bit of information, like, we've got to get him before the grand jury and get his testimony locked in. So I go to serve the grand jury subpoena to Willie, and Willie and I had talked several times. I actually kind of liked Willie. We'd talked several times, and I said, I just off the cuff mentioned Smith being in jail. He was completely surprised. He had no idea. He said, are you serious? I said, yeah, he's in jail. He goes, well, okay, well, I'll be at your grand jury. And it was, 2 or 3 days later. Well, the day he shows up for grand jury, he goes in to meet with the prosecutor, the ASA. They call me back in, and he looked at me and said, hey, that girl you've been looking for? I said, yeah. He goes, I know where she is. I said, how do you know? He goes, because I buried her.
So when he said that he said no and Smith drove away, he wasn't telling the truth.
He was not telling the truth. He describes the location where he buried her. It's in a field behind the Grigsby Ford house, not far from where he lives. And the story he tells us is that night, what happened was Smith comes to his house, gets him up, and says, we've got a situation at the Grigsby Ford house. Doesn't know what it is. He goes over there, sees a female body on the ground. He didn't know Susan, but he's able to say it was Susan once he saw pictures of her. Said she's dead. They drag her, take her a couple hundred yards back behind the house into a field. Smith is standing there with a gun, tells Willie to dig the grave, digs a grave about 5 foot deep, which is a very deep grave for something like this, and they leave. He threatens Willie, if you say anything, I'll get you and your family. So Willie said, the reason I've never told you guys is I was scared to death that he was going to kill me and my family. And again, understandably so. He had all these other murderous cases in Malvern, and he stood right next to a dead body. And so as soon as he learned that Smith was in jail and couldn't harm him, he told us the truth. Next morning, we take ERT out, and the grave, and it's just exactly what he says. We recovered the body, identified as Susan right away. There are, I don't remember the exact number of gunshots, I think 5 or 6 gunshots to her, which again matched up with what Donna told us about hearing 5 to 7 gunshots.
What did Smith have on Willie that made him know that all he had to do was show up at Willie's house and tell him what to do, and he would do it?
Willie never completely gave us the whole truth on that, but what we think is he had bought drugs from Smith in the past. So Smith had been one of his dealers. I never found any other kind of criminal activity. Willie was a mechanic. He had done some work for Smith, so they had a little bit of, they weren't friends, but they had some professional association. He had bought drugs from him. We're almost positive. We go back to the U.S. Attorney's Office when we have this information. Of course, recovering Susan's body changed the whole dynamic of everything. We met with a local prosecutor. Most of the time in Arkansas, a murder, even something related to federal, most homicides are prosecuted at the state level. Arkansas is a death penalty state. A lot of times it's just kind of easier to work through the state system. But the state didn't have the drug conspiracy charges that we could use. So the decision was made to prosecute Smith and Sherman at the federal level, which we actually then had to kind of go back and do a new sort of a periphery investigation. All we had focused on was them killing Susan, trying to find Susan. Well, now we needed to prove that they were actually drug dealers. So that wasn't difficult. We proved that. Time helped us a little bit because Smith was put into a local jail. There's local jails of holding as he was waiting his trial on the federal system. Well, he gets placed in a cell near one of his friends that used to sell drugs for him, buy drugs for him, deliver drugs for him. He was in the drug culture with him, and he told the friend what happened. Well, the friend had his own troubles, and he was facing federal charges. He calls the AUSA that's prosecuting him and says, I've got information for you. So he came forward, and Smith had given him details that really only the killer would know. we've got the body, we've got Molly Anderson, we've got William McMillan, we've got this other inmate. So we've got a pretty decent case. I present the case to the grand jury on September the 3rd, 2019. They indicted them. It was a 5-count indictment, and I won't read the exact charges to you, but they were all related to witness tampering, conspiracy, witness tampering resulting in death, distributing meth, and using a firearm in a drug crime. We go through the process that we seek death penalty approval from DOJ. DOJ turns that down. We press forward with the trial. Trial is in 2021. By this time, I've retired from the FBI. Brought me back because I worked the case. I actually sat at the table with the prosecutors. The trial lasted 2 weeks. We brought a bunch of witnesses that kind of told the story in a longer version of what you and I have discussed today. The defense attorney basically focuses their efforts on discrediting our witnesses. And all our witnesses, really except for me and the analyst, just about almost all our witnesses were drug culture witnesses. So there were credibility issues people were concerned about. But jury deliberated for 6 hours and found both of them guilty. They end up being sentenced. Sherman gets 1 life term. Smith gets 2 life terms, plus 20 more years for distributing drugs and another 50 years for using the firearms. Case is appealed to the 8th Circuit in June of 2013, and the convictions are upheld. And so they are both in jail where they should be for the rest of their lives.
Now, what kind of time were they looking at for the crimes that had them in jail while you were doing this investigation? And what was it?
Smith wasn't facing anything until we arrested him on the local charges for murder. He was running free. Sherman was in jail. Initially, his supervised release from his first drug sentence was revoked. So he's in there, and he ends up being indicted on the drug buys from Susan, which I don't remember what he got on that. His was the initial drug buys. And then although we didn't charge Donna because she was charged, locally, she was charged with murder, which was pled down to hindering apprehension or something along those lines.
I do want to let everybody know that Donna is not her true name. You've decided to use an alias. Could you tell us why?
Sure. And actually, most of the names in the book are aliases. And there were several things. Some of them, because they were witnesses, I wanted to protect their identities. In Donna's case, Donna has young children that live in that community, and I didn't really see the need for me to memorialize their mother's behavior. Never seen Donna. Perhaps she's turned her life around. You can only hope. I just didn't really feel like I wanted to be the one that held it over her head.
I will have in the show notes for this episode the actual federal charges from the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Arkansas and a couple of newspaper articles, but we are going to be using the name Donna for this episode.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So at the end, working on this case, were the FBI and did you want to give a shout out to any other agencies or individuals involved?
I definitely want to give out a couple. The FBI analyst, she's still working. She did not want her true name in there. We never would have made this case without her in the work. She's actually known throughout the Bureau for her abilities. And so she was a tremendous benefit to us.
And, and while we're talking about her, can we talk a little bit more about that cellular evidence? And I don't know if we went into detail as to what it showed you, because I'm sure you presented that in the trial.
And I talk about it in the book quite a bit. Of course, the first part for me was just trying to identify potential witnesses. They're frequent callers. They all use aliases or fake names, or not, I shouldn't say they all. A lot of them, had fake names in their phone records, but they had social media stuff that they could link back and get the true identities for. So the analysts did a lot of that work for us. The cast guys were the ones that were able to go back and look at Smith's records and show him making that trip to Batesville and back, which was a huge part of our case. Making that trip up and back in the hours before Susan was killed. Timelines. There were Tammy Edwards, who made the initial report, wasn't lying, but she was off on her time. And for a while there, it kind of messed us up. Well, once we got the cell phone records and the Facebook records, we were able to kind of pinpoint some times. And we narrowed Susan's time of death down to about a 14-minute window. We knew when she'd made her last telephone call to Smith, and we knew when Donna had made some calls when she was in shock afterwards. So phone records were huge in doing that. The cast guys, like I talked, they made the pinpointed the trip. There was also some evidence that came out that I had never heard of, and it was fairly new, that would have made our case even stronger, but the judge didn't allow it in. And this is in the book. It's nothing secret, but they're called NELOS records, NELOS. And I don't know what the acronym stands for, but those records actually showed Smith at the Grigsby Ford house at the time of the murder and at the site where Susan's body was buried. But it was new technology at the time. The judge we had didn't feel it was sufficiently proven to allow in, so he didn't. But that would have been a great nail in the coffin to have, because you could see the times and it all matched up really well.
I'm going to look that up, and I will put a link with information about that telephone analysis technique in the show notes because it sounds fascinating, and I take it that they use it now.
That was 5 years ago. And so I would assume it's probably common. In my book, where I kind of describe it, it's all stuff I took off the internet. You can read about it. And I do think it is interesting. I think it would make a good show note.
It would also make a good thing to add into a book one day.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, you ought to file that away for future reference. It might be good for you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the book then. What made you decide that you wanted to write a book, and what was it about this investigation that made you decide that this would be the topic or the subject of your first nonfiction true crime book?
As you're aware, the FBI really has limited jurisdiction in working homicide cases. I mean, it almost has to be, like in this case, a federal witness or something that happens on a government reservation of some sort. But when I got here in 1997, got on ERT, wasn't a lot of crime scene people trained. The ERT concept had only been around for, just, 3 or 4 years, not very long. Arkansas, a lot of rural departments, many of the departments would have a single investigator, for an entire county. Not a lot of crime scene training. So we had ASACs and SACs that would let our ERT guys go out and help on homicide cases. And all we would do was process the crime scene and hand, the evidence off. And most of the time we were done with the case. Well, when I retired, I just kind of got thinking, homicides were my passion to work. And I started going through my notes and realized I'd been on 25 or 30 death investigations. So I decided, my kids may like this eventually or be interested. So I wrote some short stories, tried to find an agent, couldn't find it, probably tried 40 or 50 different people, couldn't find anybody interested in short stories. And a guy that works with me now used to be a newspaper writer, told me, he said, man, pick out one case and write that case first and then try to, get your name out there. So I picked this case. And for a couple of reasons. One for the reason he did. But the other one is this was late in my career. But by the time it was over, I'd spent about 4 years associated with this case. I'd gotten relatively close to the victim's family. The deputy that I worked with those last few years, he and I got to be pretty good friends throughout the process, worked closely with the AUSAs. And so I just thought this was a good place to start. And now I'm kind of going back to writing some short stories on some child cases I hope to have out in the spring. I've got another case after that. So I've got 3 or 4 more of these books I'd like to write. So that was the writing part. If I could go back for a minute, you asked me about recognizing some people. Yeah, I mentioned that analyst. There are 2 or 3 other people I want to call out. Glenn Pye, P-Y-E. Glenn, retired Fish and Wildlife. Like a lot of us got caught up in that mandatory retirement because of age, decides to go work at the Hot Spring County Sheriff's Office and just had a passion for working these cases because it was things he hadn't worked. He and I spent hours and hours and hours riding around Arkansas, tracking down witnesses, texting after hours about, possible leads. The AUSA's assigned to the case. Initial AUSA's a great guy. In fact, he's the one that figured out the whole Facebook process. He gets transferred, and the 2 AUSA's that pick it up after that, phenomenal AUSA's, worked closely with us all through the prosecution. Then one of them, Bart Dickinson, when I wrote the book, he actually weighed in heavily on the book. So I do want to recognize those. This was very much a team effort. It certainly was not the Jerry Spurgers show by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, I am sure they appreciate the shout out.
Good deal.
I will add your book, which again is called Murder at Midnight, and I'll add that to my FBI reading resource list. It's really great how many retired agents are writing now. My list itself, and these are just the people that have been guests on my show, is now over 100 books.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
People love true crime, and retired FBI agents know true crime and know how to write a good tale. So congratulations on you accomplishing that.
Thank you.
All right. So it's time now for us to talk about your origin story. When and why did you join the FBI?
I graduated college with a criminal justice degree and went into the Air Force immediately after college and spent about 6 years as a military policeman. About 1995 or so, I had, 7 years in the military at that time. I was coming up on some remote assignments. I was married, had 2 young kids, and was looking for a couple different things. I was looking for a little more stability. I loved being in the Air Force. It was a great job. I was, not having any problems getting promoted at the right times. And I guess I probably would have done fine. But I wouldn't want to be away from my wife and my kids. And one of my coworkers was a Marine, very similar situation, and he had applied to join the Bureau. I really had never thought that the Bureau would even consider me. I'd always heard the rumor, you got to be an accountant or a lawyer, to get in. And I was neither. But I applied, and, timing is everything. In the mid-90s, we were coming out of a hiring freeze, and they hired I think 3,600 of us in a 3-year period. And so I was in a position where I wanted more time with my family. I wanted to see if I could be an investigator. As a military policeman, I really was a security guard, important task and all that, but I wanted to know, could I really be a cop? And so I put in for it, and timing was good, and I got in. I was fortunate. I'm a native Arkansan, married a girl from Tennessee, came in under Director Free, who was a very family-friendly guy, who kind of believed in getting you where you wanted to be and that you would work harder. Somehow managed to get to Arkansas for my first office, landed on the Violent Crime Squad, which is exactly the kind of work I wanted to do, and spent my entire career there. Did it for 12 years as a street agent, was a supervisor for 7 years. And when my supervisor term was up, they allowed me to stay on the squad, going back as a street agent, and ended up doing that for, I think, almost 5 more years.
Well, you definitely had a unique career, especially when it came to homicide investigations, because as you mentioned, the FBI doesn't really work a lot of murders. Matter of fact, I have a blog post that I'll link in this episode where I talk about what kind of murder investigations the FBI gets involved in. But you participating or taking part in 25 homicide crime scene analysis is pretty amazing. You've got to be one of the most experienced agents in the FBI who have had a chance to do that.
Well, and Jerry, just let me clarify just a little bit. Death investigations. Some of them were not homicides. There were a couple of them were accidental deaths, but most of them, I'd say 80% of them were homicides. Some of them were just death investigations.
Well, even so, just having that type of experience is definitely something to be proud of. I hate to say it that way.
Right. I understand, and the cops in the room understand. Nobody else might, but we understand what you're saying.
Now, 25 death investigations may not sound like a lot to a big city homicide detective who may see those types of numbers in maybe even a month. But for a small town Arkansas department that has never had a death, in the 25 crime scenes or death investigations that you were able to respond to, I assume there were some departments that just didn't have the experience and really needed your help. They must have been so relieved to have you come and assist at their crime scene.
Oh, absolutely. I do think they appreciated the help. That was one of the things that the Bureau could loan to these agencies is, particularly in the late 90s, early 2000s, there just wasn't a lot of forensic training available. A lot of departments in Arkansas couldn't afford it, didn't have the manpower, didn't have the equipment. So I do think we were able to contribute quite a bit by bringing in, when they wanted, a full 8-person team to come in and process crime scenes. I think we were of great assistance to them.
Why don't we take the time to go through a call? So you get a call from a small town police department, and there has been a death, and they request the FBI's assistance. Now, you just mentioned an 8-person team. Can you take us through the steps of what you would do?
Sure. The first thing, of course, we would have to do, if there was no federal nexus, is obtain permission from our special agents in charge or assistant special agents in charge, ASAC. And almost always, we were very fortunate to have upper management that realized the importance of helping out and almost always gave us permission to do that. So once we had permission to respond, I would send out back in the old days, send out a page, and then later on cell phones and emails to reach out to the ERT members to put together a team. And as you're aware, evidence response team members all had other primary duties. This was always a ancillary duty for them. So we couldn't always get the same guys. But once we got a team put together, we would, depending on where the location was, people would respond directly to the scene, or we would meet up at our headquarters office, get our crime scene truck together, and make sure that we had the legal means to be there. There's no homicide exception. If it's in a private residence, we had to have a search warrant or consent or something along those lines. So we'd make sure we had jurisdiction to be there. Then once we did, we would pull up on the scene, and the team leader, quite often was me, identify ourselves to the senior local officer and just tell them, hey, we're here to help. What would you like us to do? And most of the time, they were very, I think, appreciative and grateful just to say, hey, here's what we have. Y'all process it. The FBI, we had very well-trained photographers, videographers. We had the equipment to collect for DNA, to process footprints, to process fingerprints. And depending on the nature of the scene, we could bring additional resources into it. Sometimes if it was something as serious as a buried body, we would bring in guys that had been through body recovery class that were able to lead us through those processes. And all of it was just depending on the nature of itself. But I think the biggest thing was we got those departments that a lot of times were understaffed. By us taking over the crime scene portion, they could go work with other things, interviewing witnesses, trying to track down leads, and things of that nature.
Can you give an example of a case that you may have responded to where the deceased person is at the crime scene? What kind of things would you do? Because I think one of the misconceptions that you see so many times in books, TV, and movies is the FBI coming in and taking over. And I explain to people that we don't even have a morgue. In these situations, we always have to work with the state investigators and state examiners on these matters. So take us step from step, what you would do in that type of situation.
Sure. And we unfortunately worked several of those. One of the, I guess, benefits of being in a small state like Arkansas with a small law enforcement community is we got to know each other pretty well. There were troopers that I worked with in 1988 that I was still working with when I retired in 2021. The helpful part of that is we could roll up on a crime scene and pretty quickly get things hashed out and agreed who would do what, how we would divide resources. And in just multiple scenes, I can think of when we get the call. One in particular comes to mind that was it was the execution of two individuals in Conway, Arkansas. And this was, again, those early years before we had a lot of crime scene training. The Conway detective and I were good friends, realized he could use some forensic help. We deployed a team that night, and I met with him, met with the local prosecutor. And the first thing I did was make sure that we had jurisdiction to be there. And they had obtained a search warrant for the house. We went in, and I say we, just a very minimal presence. Usually it was just the team leader and the photographer. And in this case, it was the lead detective, walked up to where the bodies were, showed me what we had, and then we backed off and discussed a plan. In that particular instance, our plan was they were going to kind of maintain the perimeter, start talking to individuals that were related to the decedents, and we, my team, were going to process the crime scene. This particular one, we did not have to rope up because it was inside a house, but on the outdoor crime scenes, we'd make sure there was a crime scene barrier set up that would keep people out. And we'd send in a photographer to take photographs, and we would do it from every angle possible. We would use distance photographs to catch overall pictures, mid-range photograph to get increased detail, and then close range of the, in this case, bodies. Once those were done, we would bring in crime scene processors that would look to see if there was any evidence close by, cigarettes, spent shell casings, maybe soda pop bottle or Coke bottle or something along those lines, anything that could be evidence. Collect those. Once we had collected everything that we could, usually we would talk to the coroner and say, okay, we'd like to turn the body over and see what's on the bottom side. And that was an important aspect is we never did that on our own, that we didn't just go in and take over. We would work with the coroner. And a lot of them, this particular one, the coroner would be the one that would turn the bodies over. We would look to see if there's any evidence under the bodies that needed to be covered. We would do things like put paper bags around the victim's hands to make sure any evidence there, possibly DNA under the fingernails or hairs or something that might have gotten attached to their bodies during the murders, we didn't lose. Once we'd done that, the coroner would bring in a body bag. We would seal the body up, and then the coroner would leave with the body. And as you mentioned, there were no FBI morgues. It was usually the Arkansas State Crime Lab. In some cases, it might be a local funeral parlor that was taken to temporarily. And we would finish processing the scene. Again, looking for things like fingerprints, DNA evidence, trace evidence, anything that would help us identify the perpetrators. We might fast forward a couple of days and to when an autopsy would be conducted. A lot of times an investigator would go, sometimes an ERT member would go for the autopsy. And if it was not a federal crime scene, if it was a state crime scene, we would package up all the evidence, hand it over to the detective in charge, and we would quite often be done with the case until perhaps it went to trial if we needed to testify about some of our response activities.
How do you get used to, and maybe you don't, being around a dead body?
That's a good question and one I get asked a lot. And for me, a lot of it was my faith. And I really believed that I was in the position I was supposed to be. And I was convinced that if I didn't do my job right, someone might get away with a murder or someone else might be harmed. And a lot of it was just compartmentalization and realized, okay, this is very sad. I don't like being here. But the bigger thing, my feelings were less important than the need to see justice done. And not everybody can do that. We're all kind of wired differently, but that was how I dealt with it. My faith was a big part of it. I was just thinking about the differences in homicide investigations compared to other cases. And one thing that struck me was sometimes the tact that we would have to exercise in asking questions, because the victims had family members. And sometimes the victims were in bad situations and compromising situations, or the victims themselves weren't flawless. Susan Cooper, for instance, Susan had some issues, and sometimes family members would not want to talk about that, which would throw our investigation off. So part of our role as a homicide investigator was to be able to convince the family, listen, we're going to exercise as much tact and privacy and respect with your family members we can, but we need to know the truth and everything we can in order to try to solve the cases. And it just was situational awareness. And then also just the need to be professional, because some of these crime scenes, particularly the outdoor crime scenes, there were bystanders, family members, maybe relatively close by. They could see, and hopefully not hear us, but could see what was going on. We just had to make sure that we wanted to be professional. We wanted to be thorough. We had to exercise sometimes a great degree of tact also.
These are valuable insights that you've given to us about crime scenes when someone has died. I have a lot of listeners who write crime dramas and crime novels, and you've been able to get some insights that they may not have been aware of. When you look at TV shows and movies, what kind of things do you see during a scene where a death has occurred that makes you shake your head and say, nah, that's not how it works?
The first thing that comes to mind, and you mentioned this, is just the complete myth that the FBI walks in and says, okay, we're taking over. We have this. That always frustrates me when I see that. The other thing is when you see these DNA analysis being conducted within minutes, they have a suspect identified. And as you and I both know, sometimes those take days and weeks and sometimes even longer to get those identifications. A big one is the way things just happen so quickly. And just sometimes the idea of having, it looks like dozens and dozens of agents and analysts rolling over crime scenes, when in reality, the FBI as anybody else, there's a limited number of resources. And so sometimes it doesn't have a whole field office deploying on a single case. Those are the things that were just too far-fetched to be real.
Again, in your book and your upcoming books, readers will be able to get a true understanding of how things happen. So I really appreciate you talking to us about that. You retired in 2021. We talked about the fact that you're writing. What else are you doing now? I mean, are you able to still use all that experience you gained in the FBI in your next adventure?
To some extent. In 2021, I was 56, coming up on mandatory retirement, and the Arkansas House of Representatives decided they wanted to create a chief security officer position. This was, not long after the January 6th stuff in D.C., and the speaker and the chief of staff really just wanted to make sure that everything was being done possible that could be done to protect the representatives and the staff. So I went to work in that position, chief and sergeant of arms. I've been there for 5 years into this month. As we talked, I've written the first book. I've got another one that's hopefully getting fairly close to, hope to have it out by late spring, a couple more out there. And probably my favorite thing, though, is pops to 2 grandkids. That I've got a 3-year-old grandson and a 6-month-old granddaughter. And that's kind of really where my greatest joy in life comes from right now.
Well, I moved from all the way from South Jersey, Philadelphia area to Raleigh, North Carolina for that reason and that reason only. So I understand.
Well, I get it, and I appreciate that. And I know those grandkids do. We talk about it in church a lot, that, just the impact parents and grandparents have on kids. And, with the things you and I have seen in our careers, we know those kids need all the positive impacts they can get.
Absolutely. Well, I will put a link to where people can pick up a copy of your book, Murder at Midnight. But we are now at the point of the episode where I like to give my guest the last word. So what would you like to say?
Well, so just very briefly, again, thanks again for having me. I really appreciate your time, and it's an honor to consider me for your program, so I appreciate that. I appreciate you trying to get the good word out about what the Bureau's doing. It's tough times right now, and I think hearing some people need to hear some of the positive things that the Bureau, that law enforcement in general does. And the only other thing I wanted to add, I was thinking, if any of your listeners are law enforcement people who are thinking about writing a book at some point in time, don't break any rules, but take good notes. Take good notes. As I've been preparing for these books, it's amazing how much I've forgotten in the last almost 30 years. And so that's one of the things as an aspiring writer I've learned is I wished I'd taken a lot more notes along the way.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com, where you'll find a photo of Jerry Spurgers and other case-related images, as well as links to news articles about the case reviewed. There's also a link to my blog post about how and when the FBI investigates missing person and murder cases. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 100 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.